Today, we're looking at a really interesting tool called the Trendline Breakout Navigator, and this one's by LuxAlgo. It's an indicator that's designed to take all the heavy lifting out of drawing and interpreting trend lines by automatically plotting 3 different types on your chart. We're going to dive deep into what this indicator shows you, how it works, and a couple of ways you might use it in your trading. If you find this video helpful, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps out. Now, to get started with this indicator, you first of all want to go to TradingView. That's the charting platform I'm going to be using today. If you haven't got an account, no worries. There's a link down in the video description you can use to sign up. Once you're on TradingView, go ahead and load up whatever security and time frame you like to trade. Then, you're going to click on the Indicators tab, and in the search bar just type in Trendline Breakout Navigator. You'll want to pick the one by LuxAlgo. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the all-powerful Trendline Breakout Navigator. It's a pretty comprehensive indicator that automatically draws different types of trend lines to help you spot the direction of the trend, potential breakouts, retests, and even those little bounce reactions off the lines. It's all about making trendline analysis clearer and more automated. So, let's talk about what you're actually seeing on your chart. The main thing this indicator does is plot 3 distinct types of trend lines. First, you've got your long-term trend line, which shows up as a solid line. Think of this as the main structural backbone of the current market trend. Then, there's the medium-term trend line, drawn with dashes, which shows you the broader trend that's happening within that longer-term structure. And finally, you have the short-term trend line, which appears as a dotted line, and this one reflects the most recent, quickest price action shifts. These trend lines are drawn starting horizontally from a swing point, and then they connect to a confirmed higher low for a bullish trend line, or a lower high for a bearish one. The indicator is also smart enough to optimize these lines if historical closing prices breach the initial drawing. And speaking of swing points, you'll also see optional labels for HH, higher high, or LL, lower low, which can give you a heads up about a potential shift in the trend, and these are linked to a specific trendline term you choose in the settings. When a new higher high or lower low is confirmed, the indicator kicks off a fresh trend line for that term. For example, a new long-term trend line will start from the highest high or lowest low of the previous trend, initially plotting horizontally until a new significant swing point is detected, and then it'll adjust. This creates a really nice layered view of the market. Another cool thing you'll see are these little dots appearing on the trend lines. You'll get a blue dot when price pokes through a bullish trend line with its wick during an uptrend. Specifically, a higher low forms, but the candle doesn't close below the line. And you'll see an orange dot if price wicks through a bearish trend line during a downtrend, forming a lower high without a candle closing above it. These dots are super handy because they highlight these tested trendline moments and can signal either a potential continuation of the trend or maybe even a reversal brewing. The indicator also features bar coloring, which is influenced by where the closing price is relative to all 3 trend lines. If the close is above the long-term trend line, the bars will show a gradient of green. It'll be a darker green if the price is still below the medium or short-term lines. Conversely, if the close is below the long-term trend line, you'll see a gradient of red, which gets darker if the price is currently above the medium or short-term lines. There's also an optional background color you can turn on. This will change the chart background to green when the price breaks above a chosen bearish trend line or when a higher high occurs, and red if the price breaks below a chosen bullish trend line or a lower low occurs, giving you an instant visual cue of the overall bias based on the trendline term you're focused on. Now, let's peek into the settings because you've got a good bit of control here. First up, there's a period setting. This is really useful because you can set the trend lines to be based on data from a higher time frame, like having 4-hour trend lines on your 30-minute chart, which is great for multi-timeframe analysis. Just be aware it can go up to 5,000 bars back. For each of the 3 trend lines, long, medium, and short term, you can adjust the swing length. This basically tells the indicator how many candles to look at to define a swing point. Higher numbers will give you more significant, longer-term swing levels. You can also customize the colors for your bullish and bearish trend lines and those little blue and orange wick dots. A key setting is the term selection. This lets you choose whether the HHLL labels and the background color feature are linked to the long-term, medium-term, or short-term trend line. you can toggle the HH/LL labels on or off and decide if you want them to show the previous swing high-low too. And of course, you can turn that background color on or off. I usually like to set my trend lines to a higher time frame. Say if I'm on the 30-minute chart, I might set the period in the settings to the 4-hour chart to get that broader perspective. Alright, back to it. So, how can we actually use this Trendline Breakout Navigator to find some trade setups? Well, the logic is pretty intuitive. When a short-term trend line breaks, the market often tends to move towards the medium-term trend line. If that one gives way too, then the price will typically gravitate towards the long-term trend line, which is usually the strongest of the three. So, for a bullish setup, let's say we're using that higher time frame perspective I mentioned, maybe 4-hour trend lines on a 30-minute chart. First, you'd check the background color. If it's green, that tells us we're in overall bullish territory and should probably be looking for long opportunities. But we're not just going to jump in. We'll wait for a short-term bearish trend line to break to the upside. This break acts as a signal for a potential continuation of the bigger uptrend. Once that break happens, you could consider an entry. For your stop loss, you might place it just below the most recent swing low. And for an initial target, you could aim for the next significant level, which might be a bearish medium-term trend line plotted by the indicator. One thing to keep in mind, especially with higher time frame levels, is that these trend lines can actually update while your trade is open. If a key level shifts mid-trade, you'd want to consider exiting or adjusting as soon as that updated level is reached to keep your strategy dynamic. Let's look at another way you could use it, maybe to ride a trend a bit longer with some added confirmation. For a bullish setup in this style, imagine a bearish long-term trend line has just been broken to the upside, and right after, a new bullish long-term trend line gets plotted by the indicator. That's a big signal to start thinking about buying opportunities. Now, let's say price pulls back towards this new long-term bullish trend line, and you see a blue dot appear, signaling a bounce where the price wicked through but didn't close below it. Instead of entering right on the dot, we'll wait for a bit more confirmation. Specifically, we want to see a bearish short-term trend line break to the upside after that bounce has occurred. Once that happens, you've got some nice alignment. You could then place your stop loss just below the point where that blue bounce dot was detected. For a target, you might look for one of the major previous highs on the chart. And if things go well and, say, a medium-term trend line also breaks in your favor, you could consider moving your first stop to break even and maybe even adding to your position. For bearish setups, you'd just flip this logic. You'd look for the background to be red, wait for a short-term bullish trend line to break to the downside for a continuation, or for bounces, orange dots, off key bearish trend lines confirmed by a subsequent break of a short-term bullish trend line. So, to wrap it up, the Trendline Breakout Navigator by LuxAlgo is a really solid tool that automates the often tricky process of drawing and managing multiple trend lines. It gives you those long, medium, and short-term views, highlights key swing points with HHLL labels, shows potential bounce areas with the wick dots, and uses bar and background coloring to give you an immediate sense of trend direction and momentum. It can really help take some of the guesswork out of identifying potential breakouts, retests, and trend continuations by providing a layered contextual view of the market structure, and it's especially handy for multi-timeframe analysis. Now, please remember, what I've shown you here is not financial advice. The strategy examples are just to showcase how this indicator can be used in the markets and aren't a complete, profitable long-term system on their own. It's always a good idea to add your own discretionary judgment, price action analysis, maybe some smart money concepts, or whatever other tools you use to build a complete trading strategy around an indicator like this. If you found value in this video, remember to leave a like, or even better, consider subscribing to stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.